this last segment real quick and go into the world's greatest formulator. I think it's amazing what you've done, what you've accomplished, and literally what you're doing. We talked a little bit about the ketogenic industry and the ketogenic movement and what you've done there. But this supplement industry, I think you've brought light to a lot of very interesting topics that people, you see a bottle in the store and you trust what's on the back, or you see a tub of protein powder, and we're trusting to some capacity when it comes to supplements. It's very unregulated in a large capacity. There's been documentaries on how unregulated it is, and in some essence it's fairly scary because of how easy it is to enter into that market. So can you speak at a high level to start kind of the supplement industry in general, what it takes to really be a good supplement and develop a good company versus some corners that people can cut and really put out a product next week? If you wanted to just be, hey, I'm putting out my own product, I can just have a co-packer and manufacturer put out a product and you don't even know what's in it. Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, well, one of the most important things from the start, I think, is having someone who's super passionate make the supplement. And I feel like a lot of these companies, it's run by the CFO or the CEO, and they're just putting out products for profit. And I get it's a business, but if you want a legacy and you want people to really build a community around what you're doing. I mean, this with ketogenic.com and ASPE and the things that you do, you're very mindful of these things, like doing things the right way. That's going to create a lasting legacy and something that people are like, want to share. They want to be a part of. And for me, I care so much about these products. I think that comes through in the formulations and when people talk to me about them, of course. But even when people see them, they're like, wow, this is a really well-made product. And there's a small percentage of people that really understand formulations, but they're also a very vocal crowd. And for me also, when I've hired my team, I have people, again, that are passionate about the product, that take the product. I've had people that have great resumes for supply chain. I don't care what the job is at BioTrust or Dymatize or whatever. It can be anything. It can be warehouse, anything. You have to be passionate about supplements. You have to take supplements because you won't cut corners. You'll stay longer and make sure that box is put together right. You'll stay longer and make sure those numbers are ran correctly. You'll stay longer and make sure that tastes perfect. You'll stay longer and make sure that label is done. I've checked it 3 times. I'm going to check it one more time because it matters. Because it's now your legacy, because you understand it, because your mom's taking it, because Ryan Lowery's taking it, because it is something really important. People are consuming these things, and they can get harmed from them.
Yes.
And it matters.
I say this all the time. I say authenticity and transparency always wins. And I learned that from you early on when I did an internship with you back when you were just finishing up at Dymatize. And one of the companies, whether you like them or not, people are worried about some of their artificials and ingredients with them. But one of the companies that you and I both appreciate and know very well is Quest Nutrition, right?
Yeah.
And I think the story of Quest, I should get Ron and Daniel and them on here to talk about it. But the story in short is they literally found out on a Friday that their formulation, something that was in their bars, was causing a slight elevation in glucose and insulin levels because they were having diabetics report back and going, hey, my sugar's getting bumped up a little bit. And they made a switch on the weekend and completely transformed their entire bar, and people freaked out. People were like, this bar's getting hard, it tastes different, what the hell did you do? Like, you're cutting corners. In actuality, the bar was more expensive because they used a more expensive ingredient / fiber, but they knew that fiber wasn't going to cause a glucose and insulin response, and their sales took a hit, like a big freaking hit. But eventually they knew the long game was, hey, listen, we're going to explain to you why we made that move, because we're in it for the right reasons. And that's why I've always been drawn to, like, all the supplements I take, like 90% of them, like, even people ask about traditional berberine, like, I take IC5, which is a product that you formulate, because I trust it, like, right? Like, I know what's in that product. I know exactly the science behind it, because that's the effort and intensity and passion that you put into it. And that's what I appreciate with any supplement company that's out there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that support, and I totally agree with those words. One of the most important things is that you do the work also. Like, you don't take someone else's word for it. We test the raw materials. We test the finished goods. We do stability testing. We do blending studies. Everything to make sure there isn't hot and cold spots, to make sure that the active's there, to make sure with HPLC, HPTLC, to make sure it's the right species, because now you're getting a lot of stuff where you test out for the active, but it's because the species is spiked with another one to make it much cheaper. So, and most people aren't testing species with HPTLC. And we're doing all these studies, doing stability work, because it's not just about like when this, what this product says on the label for when it's made. It's also for the full shelf life. It's supposed to test out. So 2 years, it's supposed to still test out and meet this label. So we have to do stability work to prove that out. And when we look at like a raw material, like literally, I remember with ginkgo, we went through, it was about 75 different sources. You know how much time and testing that takes for our multivitamin, because there's over 30 nutrients, the interaction between nutrients. We spent 2 years of pilot blending, 2 years working on it to make sure we got the right levels. Like, people don't realize, like, when you do something right, this one's $5 more. Dude, worth it. Dude, if I can tell you, like, 1, do you want to get what's on the label? 2, do you not want to get what's not on the label? Because a lot of times there's, things that you don't want in there, heavy metals, bacteria, again, spiked species of plants that maybe you don't want. There's potentially some drugs in there, and cross-contamination because they didn't do a clean blend. And the other issue is, like, if you don't do like deep dive blending studies, you get what's called hot and cold spots in the blend, where you could get like 500 milligrams of caffeine in one, capsule, and you could get 50 milligrams in another capsule. And it's like, whoa, do you think that's problematic? Yeah, it's problematic. So doing your due diligence with a company you can trust. I'm not saying it has to be a Shawn Wells production, but I mean, certainly look at like a quality company that's been around, that has a good reputation, that's consistent, that athletes get behind, clinicians potentially get behind, that says they do the work for testing, that isn't too cheap where it doesn't add up. I mean, if you're buying your stuff at Walmart, I don't know what to tell you, but it's probably not the best place to buy supplements.
Agreed.
So yeah, go with the trusted brands, and feel free to actually call the brand and say, like, what do you do for testing? And by the way, we also have a company of third-party medical doctors that review everything for us too. Like, you shouldn't be able to have like a log of adverse events. And there's always going to be adverse events because people are on other medications, they're on, different things, and a supplement can get pulled into that, mix. People have diseases and other, pre-existing things. And a lot of times it's not the supplement, but you still have to review it, take it seriously, and work with your third-party doctor, group, and say, okay, like, this is what it is. No, this isn't related to the supplement at all for XXXX reasons. Or we need to change the formulation because we're seeing a trend. But luckily, like, we work with them from the start, and we would rarely ever see that. So, but you still need to take all of it seriously and work with a very talented team. Like, I have a super talented team around me of experts. Everyone's like really good at what they do, better than me. I'm just like the high level guy. And you know how this works. I mean, you work with all these amazing people. That's what you have to do. You have to surround yourself with experts that are so good at that niche thing they do. I mean, that was me, right? Like, I set out to be the world's greatest formulator, which is insane. Like, you know, I've told people, like, you probably know like 1,000 actors, like off the top of your head. I bet, like, if you watch TV and movies, you could probably name tons of actors. And like, I wanted to be this supplement formulator, of which there's probably 50 in the world, and then I wanted to be the best. Like, so it's just an insane niche that I don't know. Like, talking about manifestation, I manifested, and I'm here now, and I'm fighting to maintain my status, and I want to be the best. I want to help people. And I think as long as I'm passionate and I'm driven and I'm doing the right thing and surrounding myself with the right people, I will maintain that.
Undoubtedly. And it's funny because I've been privy to see a lot of, like, we've opened up boxes when I've come and visited, and Shawn has stuff like that are in boxes from like 20 years ago that you're seeing like on the market today, and it's like, oh, it's innovative today, and Shawn's like, yeah, I was thinking about that 20 years ago, and you're like, what? How is that possible? So there's like things in your mind now that you're thinking that are, I promise, like, if they'll see the light of day in 10 years and people will be like, wow, this is super innovative. And you're like, yeah, Shawn was working on that 15 years ago. And like, that's the important piece. And I think one of the things that you just touched on, which I really hope resonates with those that are listening, is unfortunately don't take what a lot of supplement companies and or food companies for that matter. There's been a lot of things that have come up with food, especially in the keto space recently, of them not testing out right and things like that. Like, don't take it at face value. Like, do some research, find trusted resources. That's why, like, find companies that are very transparent, open, saying, hey, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it. Like, you've always been that way with every company you've been a part of, is look at all of this testing. But like you said, it took 2 years to put out a vitamin. If I wanted to, I could launch a vitamin in a week from a third-party manufacturer. I have no idea what's going on. There's no chance for me to do stability testing or any of the HPTLC testing. None of that in a week, but I could technically do it, and we've seen that. Unfortunately, you see it now on social media all the time. I won't even say the name of a company that immediately comes in my mind, but they were a marketing company. They had all these friggin' ambassadors all over social media, blew up, was doing a huge amount, and then people were like, wait, these products are horrible. Like, there's nothing in them. And then eventually they kind of faded away, and they just kind of had this quick little rush. And I'm like, that's scary. It's about finding brands that have been doing it for a long time and that are trusted, and I'm honored that to be working with you and a lot of these things, and understanding and learning that, hey, it takes a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of resources to do this. So yeah, if you're buying your protein from Walmart, be very weary of that, because like, spend a little bit extra, because you don't know what's in it and what's not in it for that capacity. So going along those same routes, two of the things I wanted to touch on that I think are super important is you kind of broke this concept, because a lot of people here listening probably, if you don't take protein directly, you cook with it. I like baking with it and putting it into different foods. But there's this concept known as nitrogen spiking. And so can you touch on this concept very quickly? I think you kind of like broke the world with this news a couple years ago, and it was like, what just happened? Like, these companies were cutting corners, and you kind of brought out this concept of nitrogen spiking. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it was Dr. Rob Wildman and myself at Dymatize that brought this to light, and we were working with a ton of different regulatory bodies and magazines and outlets to bring this out, because we were like making all these formulas and getting frustrated. Like, how are these guys, like, you know, protein is going up and up and up in price, way at the time, and we're seeing like all these companies go down, 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 and like we're trying to compete with them, and we're like, what? How is it? So we started looking at all these labels, and there was things like taurine, glycine, creatine. They're all good nutrients. I take taurine and creatine every day. I've got some some creatine right here. And I take all that stuff every day. The problem is they're, one, cheap. So they're about, let's say, $4 a kilo for most of those things. Very cheap versus like $20 a kilo for whey protein. Then it's a game of nitrogen testing with the Keldol test. And then you take a multiplier once you get grams of nitrogen and you multiply through and you get the grams of protein. And so if you have any level of whey, you get this 6.25 multiplier. But the problem was there's this amino blend or, whatever that they throw in there. And it was many grams. And this was the way that they were cutting their protein. And really, like, some of these things, like, test out higher than, like, a gram of protein actually would, gram per gram, in terms of the nitrogen that they provide. And they're way cheaper. And most people didn't realize what was happening. They thought it was just a protein with some other cool stuff in it. Instead of, like, I'm only getting half the protein I'm supposed to be getting. I remember one company that was in Walmart even had a warning label on it that said, may appear like crystalline because of all the white flakes in your chocolate, protein. That was the crystalline taurine. And, like, they're even, like, have warnings about, like, how much is present in there. It's like, dang. But yeah, like, literally the frustrating thing about that, Rye, is that if people are paying for protein, they want optimized muscle protein synthesis. 25 grams is typically a serving of whey protein. And that 25 grams has 2.8 grams of leucine, which we know is, like, typical diets. We won't even get into keto, but typical diets, is probably what it takes around to optimize muscle protein synthesis. If you're getting half that, you're not optimizing muscle protein synthesis. That's what you're paying for the protein for.
Crazy.
And so there was this massive boom of nitrogen spiking that was, I think, very criminal with what was happening, very irresponsible. And it wasn't listed as protein, as a protein source. And glycine is at least an amino acid that you can make an argument it contributes to protein, but taurine is not even an amino acid that's present in whey protein. And then creatine is not even an amino acid. It's similar. But I mean, that's like, wow, okay. Like, that's clearly not okay. And it's sad. I mean, that's so many. We tested out a gainer that was supposed to have 50 grams of protein, and it had 700 milligrams of leucine a serving.
Wow. So what would that equate to in far as actual protein to add in?
Well, you would have to take, to optimize your muscle protein synthesis, you'd have to take 5 servings of this gainer. Crazy. So, like, I mean, it's crazy. Like, yeah, like, you would literally be taking the whole tub of, gainer. Jeez. And I don't know, like, it was obscene what was happening. And luckily it's starting to get cleaned up now, but it's very frustrating.
So basically, companies found a way, the way to test to make sure you put that claim on the back for protein is you test for nitrogen content, because because protein is technically the only macronutrient that has nitrogen, but so do amino acids. And so they were bumping these up with amino acids and claiming on the back they would test it out, and the nitrogen would equate to 25 grams of protein, but it might only be 15 or 10. And that, like you said, it is criminal, because these people, imagine someone who is suffering from sarcopenia or age-related muscle loss and is like, you know what, fine, I'm finally going to start drinking my protein, and they go to Walmart, or they go, not to bag on Walmart, but they go to some store that has an inferior protein that isn't tested out and isn't doing the due diligence to really go through the proper testing and put in the actual amount that it needs. And they're taking this protein and seeing zero benefit from it. No benefit.
Exactly.
And that is scary. That's criminal. So I think that's huge. Like I said, we talked about earlier, is you're doing a lot beyond what you're just formulating and creating ingredients. Kind of like bringing that to light was a big factor, because it really started, companies were like, we got to go back to the drawing board and really figure out how to work these margins better to make sure we're putting in actual protein. So that's huge.
Yeah, it's never been about just, I've never been super salesy. I've never just pushed the company I've been with. I've never said that's the only way. I passionately make supplements, but at the same time, I want people to be empowered and educated and trust me. And that means that I just need to tell the truth. And there's other good supplement companies out there doing the right thing, and there's a lot of ones doing the wrong thing. I just want to have it cleaned up, because I get tired, because I'm so passionate about supplements, when people say supplements don't work. They suck. It's stupid. Doesn't really make a difference. Because I had to deal with that clinically, and I was trying to put people on supplements all the time, like, that stuff doesn't work. It's dumb. It doesn't work because you're not taking the right ones. It doesn't work because you're not taking it at the right dose, the right form. You're not getting the right blend of nutrients that work on multiple mechanisms of action. You're not getting something that's well thought out, well constructed, and from quality ingredients.
So true. So true. So I agree 100%. One of the topics I want to touch on is hyperpalatability. You talked a little bit about this, but you and I, we've been involved in the nutrition and supplement industry for a while now, and even talking to people that you've talked to tons of manufacturers that make low-carb keto products, but also manufacturers that don't. And there's literally a science behind this, right? Like, there's some slogans like, bet you can't just eat one. But like, companies literally create their products so that's the case. So can you talk a little bit about hyperpalatability, and then some of these high-intensity sweeteners and sort of combinations that they put in to make sure that you do overindulge in these foods, and it isn't something that you just have one of and then put the bag aside of?
Yeah, exactly. People are saying that, like, hey, this is difficult to lose weight. And I feel like I'm addicted. I feel like I'm actually doing this thing secretly. Some people secretly eat in their car, in their office, and don't want to tell people. And if you're doing that, you're addicted. And it's not a bad thing to bring light to this addiction, because these companies, that's the problem. They are in an industry where you want to make as much money as possible, and there's money in the addiction, right? So there's something that's called the bliss point, and these food engineers have made it. So let me ask you, how often does it occur that you have something that's high carb and high fat in nature?
Never.
Almost never, right? You have this is why people are it isn't a keto the complete miracle solution to weight loss, like maybe some people say. I love, obviously, keto, like we talked about, but part of it is that we're just in this hyper, like you said, hyper palatable, ultra processed food world, where they're engineering these foods that are working against us and making us fat, making us addicted. And if you just had carbs, if you just had fruits and vegetables, there's no fat. If you had something that has fat, then, maybe there's protein with it, like an animal source or something like that. But you don't usually get the two together. The two together are those hyperpalatable things, those bliss point things. And what do we know? When you have something like high glycemic carbohydrate and fat, well, you're obviously insulin's up, right? And then we know that you're turning off lipolysis and you're promoting fat storage. And you're having something that's higher calorie that overrides your satiety signals, fullness signals, because it tastes so good. So you're having cake and cookies and these things that we love, right? And what else is hyper palatable? Things that are salty and sweet and, crispy. And think about French fries. They McDonald's French fries. They're a little bit sweet. They're a little bit salty. They're a little bit crispy. They have that fatty mouthfeel. It's literally going across all bliss points.
Right.
And people that tell me sugar's not addictive. Again, this is the if it fits your macros crowd or something. It's really? When you walk in that convenience store and you're assaulted with addiction. It's a money-making machine when you walk in that convenience store. And you're like bright labels and liquids and packages and all these things everywhere, and like Gatorade and energy drinks and sodas. And of course, there's the other addictions like alcohol and cigarettes and lottery. And it's literally like addiction central when you walk in there.
Right.
If you can like walk in and just pay your, for your gas and walk out, you are like iron-willed, because that store is meant to break you down. And it's all about addiction. And yeah, we're in a world of hyper palatable food. And so how often do you walk in there and just see like some asparagus sitting out, or like a steak or something? You don't see that. It's like all these colorful packages that are meant to make you addicted, and you feel it in your gut. Like, I feel it. I know about it. I'm a dietitian. I eat keto, and I still walk up to the register and I'm like, oh, I want that Butterfinger. And it's hard. It's hard to walk out. I am addicted too. And it's hard. Like, I'm literally like one of these AA people that like every day I'm fighting my addiction.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real. So like I empathize with someone that's, if you add to it that you're depressed, if you're overweight, if you're, you don't have things going well in your life and you're living in an abusive situation, and, you add all these things up, what's going to give you some momentary satisfaction and light up dopamine and add some serotonin in your life? It's going to be these hyper palatable foods.
That's key.
So it's like, it's your therapy when you can't afford therapy. It's the better life for a moment when you can't afford a better life.
It's scary.
But that's the nature of addiction.
It's scary because like I'm the same exact way. Like we know it, right? We're adults and we understand that. What's even scarier to me is you talk about like kids, right? Kids walk into these stores, and it's not only we've come past a point where it's like, hey, let's market to the adults. It's like, how do we get to the kids? Because the last thing mom and dad want is walking through the store with a crying kid that's like, I want that cereal, I want that fruit snack, blah, blah, because they saw Tony the Tiger on the commercial and he's their friend, and now they want to hang, and like that becomes an addiction. And so that's the scary part about that, is not only that marketing towards kids, but the other aspect are these high intensity sweeteners that like, it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna, obviously you have the sugar, and then like a lot of times companies go, all right, well, we can't really market and be like, hey, let's talk about sugar in our product, but they'll sweeten it they'll do these high intensity sweeteners to try and create this sort of mimicking response. How do we get it to taste just like sugar? And then sometimes they overshoot it, and it's like, well, this is sweeter than sugar would have been. And now it becomes like that sort of addiction. And I think you and I have talked about this, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier. Like, it's about a lifestyle. It's not like if we're talking about artificial sweeteners, like you and I have both had them and have them occasionally. It's not something that I'm going to do every single day with every single meal. But that's sort of like what can create a similar addiction with some of these byproducts. So can you talk a little bit about these high intensity sweeteners?
Yeah, exactly. So they're literally like 1,000x, so compared to sugar, like the doses are very small with some of these. And, neotame, aspartame, sucralose, NutraSweet, is aspartame, sucralose is Splenda, saccharin, which is sweet and low. And all these artificial sweeteners are very high intensity. They're super low dose, but your body like senses like this sweetness and starts turning on some of these things that are essentially shortcuts in our brain. Like, okay, something sweet. I'm sensing extreme sweetness. What do I need to do with this? And a lot of times it may. This is controversial, but one of the things that may be happening is insulin may get elevated, and you may have a drop in blood sugar because you're not providing the carbohydrate. And now this happens to me constantly. And I think it's highly individual, but I know if I have certain artificial sweeteners, I'll feel like I need to eat sugar bad. Like, it's just like it's a downward spiral sometimes for me. Like, it starts with just like a diet product, and then it ends up with like me crushing candy and cake and whatever, it's like, so I know it's real. Like, I can just have some gum sometimes, and gum will make me want to eat badly. And you're adding in like mastication, chewing. You're adding in certain enzymes that are, getting upregulated because you're doing this chewing and you're tasting sweetness. And your body's like saying, okay, like, where's this food? Where's this carbohydrate? Where's this glucose that the brain, is ready for, and different parts of your body are ready for, and it's not there. And, you feel this low, and now you're like ready to crush carbs. And that's the downward spiral to me. And I've experienced a lot. I don't know if you do, but
yeah. But I think the biggest challenge with this as well is in a consumer environment, right? You battle it. And I think you're the perfect one to speak to, because you formulated hundreds of products, how difficult it is to flavor something that, like, obviously I think it's important to opt for as much as natural sweeteners, but to kind of be on the side of the industry and say, why would they want to use these? Well, hopefully they're not doing it to try and create an addiction amongst people and make it like this super high intensity sweetener, which some of them probably do, to make it taste like better than sugar. But in some capacity, some things just don't taste good at all. And so you fight this battle of, you want to be able to put out a product that hopefully these companies are putting out to truly try and help people. But then if they're not going to eat it and it tastes like garbage, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's going to be the best thing in the world for you and help you in all these different areas and provide you with all these nutrients and tools. If people don't eat it, you're not going to be able to deliver it to them. So can you explain a little bit how difficult it is to formulate with natural flavors, colors, sweeteners, all that component?
So tough. Like, I literally, like, when I was at Dymatize, like, we could take, sucralose, which is again like Splenda, maybe a little bit of stevia for the back end, and we could flavor over anything pretty easily, and it would taste great, and it brings out the flavor. Like, you need acids and sweeteners to really make the flavor pop. And sometimes people are like, oh, like, I don't get enough flavor. It's because there isn't enough acid and flavor in there, or acid and sweetener in there, to make it pop. And so you need those elements. And with natural products, some of these ingredients are so brutal. Some of them are just so bitter that flavoring over them is so difficult. And when someone's like, oh, let's just do natural, like, okay, do you want to spend an extra $3 like on that product just on sweeteners and maskers?
It's expensive.
It takes so much work. Like, we would use like erythritol, like Swerve, stevia, like a one that's high Reb A, a high glycoside stevia, like 2 different stevias. Then we use maskers and sweetness enhancers that are natural. So we're using like 6 or 7 ingredients to try and do like what like sugar can or sucralose can. Right. And it's all about, we've talked about it, that curve, like front to back. And, sugar naturally kind of hits that middle curve. And, stevia is a back end sweetener. Fructose is a front end sweetener. Sucralose is kind of middle, like sugar. So it's hard. Like, if you really want flavor to pop and get front to back, you have to do a lot of work with these ingredients. And when you're talking all natural, which everyone says they want, but speaking of Quest, they can speak to that too. They went that way for a little bit, but everyone liked the sucralose bars way more.
Exactly.
They tried to do stevia, but it's hard. It's very hard to flavor over things and get the flavor to pop in a rounded way. So that's the difficulty.
And I think for everyone that's listening to this and hearing this for the first time, like, appreciate those companies that really do try and do that and go for it, and understand that there is some fight that they have to go through from consumers to try and get to that point. And some companies just can't get there. And the question you have to ask yourself is, would I rather consume this and have that in there, or not consume it at all and never have access to it? And so, like, that's an internal decision that you need to make. And that's why I applaud, and I try and opt for obviously natural flavors, colors, and sweeteners as much as I can. And there's some products that I know can't be made, like, not that they can't be made, but like I probably wouldn't like it. Knowing me, like I'm a sugar. I ate cereal for every meal until I was a sophomore in high school. Like, it's like I wouldn't enjoy it. So, and I think one of the coolest stories that I wanted to share with people is like how much goes into formulation. Like, you had told me a story one time where, and this is common, it's the reason why you see a lot of colors in products. Like, oftentimes you can give people and say, hey, try this around the office or something. You could try it around and it's clear, and you'll be like, hey, this is a raspberry. This is like a raspberry flavor. And you go around there like, it's missing something. I don't know. And then you go back in the lab and you put just like a drop of color for raspberry, and you come back, you're like, hey, try it now. And they're like, oh, this is spot on. Like, I don't know what you did. And it's like the color of them visually seeing that changed everything.
Exactly. That's exactly it. It's psychological. I mean, that's why, like, Gatorade Clear and Pepsi Clear and Coke Clear and all these things are flops. Right. And we love things with color. And again, it's visual stimulation, like when you walk in that convenience store and you see all the colors. But also we identify so many of these things. And sometimes they're not even the color of the thing. Like blue raspberry doesn't even make sense. The reason that started with Flavor Ice, because they had too many red flavors. They had like cherry and watermelon and whatever, like all these flavors that were red. So they were like, we can't have another flavor be red. We'll make up blue raspberry. But now people see blue and they think raspberry, and it's completely contrived. But it's a connection we make with the flavor. And you're exactly right. I mean, I would try that time and time again. It is uncanny. If you leave the color out, people are like, nah, it's okay. And then put a little bit of color in, same formula, same sweetness, same everything. And they're like, oh, this is the best. Oh. And it makes you want to like laugh inside, but like, I'm probably no better.
Right.
I just, like, I'm the one doing the experiment, but I would probably be no better. Like, I want the color. I mean, there's a perception that comes with it. And like so much of supplements and foods are expectations, right?
Very much so. Yeah.
I've made a big deal about this, like working on proteins is getting the smell. I hate when a protein has no smell. You open up the cap for the first time, that's first impressions. And if you have no aroma that's coming off of it, like it's supposed to be banana and you smell banana, or it's supposed to be coffee and you smell the coffee grounds, you're like, oh man, this is going to be good. Like, it's going to be good because your expectations are, like, it has to be really bad if it's like not, but it's amazing, right? So, I mean, with a product that doesn't smell at all, it's like, okay, like, I guess I'll try this. Like, and it's just not as good.
Right.
And it's the same thing with that whole, lack of color thing.
I think we can learn a lot from like the wine industry, right? I'm big into wine. It's like the reason why it's so big is like your nose has to be inside the cup. Like, part of it is you're smelling it as you're drinking it. If you just drank it out of a normal cup, totally different experience. So
80% of taste is smell. 80%.
Powerful.
So it's massive. Yeah.
So powerful. So I want to wrap up here. I know you're super swamped, but if you could give the audience, Shawn Wells, the world's greatest formulator, 5 top supplements that you take. It doesn't need to be for everyone, but like your favorite top 5. What are they?
Ingredients or supplements?
Ingredients. Let's do ingredients.
Okay.
Yeah.
Creatine is one of the top, not only because of maintaining lean body mass, it being an amazing methylator, and you look at like damage to DNA and some of these things, methylation is a key process that's happening a bazillion times a day in your body. But it's also neuroprotective, and we talked about how important that is. I think creatine can go hand in hand with something like fish oil and ketogenic diet or exogenous ketones.
Creatine monohydrate, right?
Yeah. Creatine is a big one for me. Next up would be berberine, because it's so powerful. Literally, they looked at 14 studies, like in a meta-analysis, and it goes head to head, it's at least as good as all the oral diabetic drugs, metformin, glipizide, and Avandia. And that's powerful to say. Berberine is amazing. So if we know that almost every disease is correlated back to mitochondrial dysfunction, inflammation, glycation, and methylation errors, then like, okay, what can I do to address all these? That's where like the things that I'm going to tell you like you should take are for those reasons, for really anti-aging / optimization.
Right.
So then I would say I'm going to put these two together, PQQ and CoQ10, for mitochondrial optimization, and again, anti-aging. Then I would go from, let's see, we got creatine, berberine, PQQ, CoQ10. I'll add in a high DHA fish oil. It's anti-inflammatory and it's a neuronutrient. And it's really important because this is phospholipid in the brain, and what are you contributing to it? And the cool thing about DHA, if you get a high DHA formula, is basically it can convert to whatever the body needs. And this isn't true of EPA. So like if you need DHA, it'll stay DHA. If you need EPA, it'll convert to that. So I like the high DHA formulas. And then, let's see, so that's inflammation, glycation, methylation. I would say, interestingly, I'm leaning towards maybe something like RBHB. I think, ramping up your ketones is interesting. And especially when we're talking about, like we've talked about with traumatic brain injury, I think a lot of us are dealing with traumatic brain injury on various levels. I had a brain scan with Dr. Amen in LA, and there was all kinds of areas that were less active, more active, damaged, that they could see with a scan. And I think this is true. I went with several other people, and all of them had these different scenarios. We've all had, just like people think like, oh, it's about like, someone knocking you out and that traumatic brain injury. We've seen data now on like just headers, just repeated headers, like in soccer. Light trauma, and it has an impact. So, and then there's things like depression and PTSD that are traumatically shutting down the brain because of emotion tying into physiology, right? Like certain parts of the brain become hyperactive and other parts of the brain become underactive. And I think, especially if you're not a ketogenic dieter and a faster, I think something like either taking caprylic acid, C8, MCTs, or BHB, especially the RBHB, it'd be super effective. And so many of us are dealing with mitochondrial dysfunction, autoimmunity, depression, traumatic brain injury, all these things where these nutrients could be very helpful. Can you do it without them? Yeah, potentially. But there's so many people that are falling short, maybe not understanding how to do it correctly with their diet. Maybe because they have certain conditions like cancer, like Parkinson's, whatever, that, okay, let's add these nutrients out there. Let's see what they do. And I'm certainly a proponent of, using things like caprylic acid and RBHB.
I love that, man. Dude, we have the same top 5. Like that's amazing. And I wish you guys, for those of you that are watching this in video, you could see it. But like, I love your thought I could see your mind going. You're like methylation. That's the mind of the world's greatest formulator. I think that's a perfect way to round this up. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate. And I think so many people are going to get so much tremendous value, not only hearing your story, hearing how you live the ketogenic lifestyle, and then this whole supplement realm. I think you shed light on so many facets that people just don't even understand or even are aware of in what's going on in the supplement industry. And thankfully, there's people like you out in the world that are doing it right and shining light and trying to not bash those that are doing it wrong, but just educating and saying, here's what it takes to do it right. Just be careful. Find those that are trusted. And I love that about you, man. So I appreciate having you on. I love you, brother. And definitely going to have to get you back on soon.
All right. Love you too. Thanks, Ryan. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.